the program, we shift our focus from oil to agriculture, specifically cocoa. Once a major export, cocoa is making a quiet comeback in the Niger Delta, and with the right investment, policy push, and local drive, it is believed that this crop would become a new engine for regional prosperity. The question is, are we ready to tap into its full potential? Joining me on the show today to make sense of this discussion is an agripreneur and soil expert. I'm talking about Ndifreke Ebu, RSS. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, you've been into cocoa. I'd like to know, how has the journey been for you? The planting, the process, or what is it like going into cocoa, especially in a time that we've probably, so many persons have moved away from talking about cocoa to talking about oil, and everyone is running to the oil sector. What is it like?
Oh, well, doing cocoa is still very interesting. You know, cocoa, like every other crop, has its own peculiarity, it has its own potentials, and as well the challenges. It's been very taxing, but at the same time, it's very rewarding, especially this year that the costs or the price of cocoa has skyrocketed by more than 100% away from last year, that we had about 1.8 million naira per ton of cocoa. But presently, cocoa per ton is going for 13 to 15 million naira. So it's quite encouraging, though it has a whole lot of intricacies, you know, for such production to be sustainable. And then as for it as a business, it is worth doing, and it's worth doing well.
Well, how useful has cocoa been? And we understand that there are some soils that might accept the growth of cocoa, and can we have such soil in the Niger Delta region?
Yeah, basically in the Niger Delta, we have about 3-4 states that their soil and their climatic factor is really of an advantage. You talk about Akwa Ibom, you talk about Abia State, you talk about Edo, and then the Cross River. Their soils are fertile and might need, where necessary, might need little adjustment, you get, for the growth. But basically, our climate and the soil is of a greater advantage for us.
Okay, so now let's look at the cocoa business now. How is the value chain like? And for the number of years which we didn't have so much discussion about cocoa, because I remember back in the 1990s, we had so many families going into cocoa plantation, and a number of times these crops were bought from foreigners. But then over the years, we've had fewer discussions about cocoa. So what is the value chain like now as it compared to the years back?
The value chain now is just still the same like years back. The only difference was that information was not as free as it is now. The value chain will basically be confectionaries. Talk about your chocolate, talk about other forms of chocolate and other forms of cocoa meat that are being processed from cocoa. So the value chain is wide. Is wide, and the only raw material right now is just the cocoa seed. So you talk about your confectionaries, your chocolates, your beverages, and sometimes some form of medications are still parts of what cocoa is being used for.
So if we're going to harness, or we're going to look at the Niger Delta region, are we really as much into cocoa as we used to be before?
Yes, we are, but due to a lot of factors like aging plants.
Okay.
Don't forget, most of the cocoa that we are harnessing today were grown years back. And like every other nature or every other thing in the nature, you know that they age. And as they age, productivity decline. So that is even one of the reasons why we are even encouraging more farmers to come into cocoa production, so that they can now augment for the aged trees that have declined in production. You know, if you want to look at far back history, you discover that cocoa was part of our cash crop. It was part of our major cash crop in the country where Niger Delta contributed a greater percentage to the production.
So the markets then, do we
We
have
still have
markets,
markets.
local and international?
We have markets, both local and international. That's why I said, at the farm gate, what we call the farm gate, at the farm where the harvesting is done, you can get cocoa a ton right now at 8 million naira. And then when you're talking about exporting it, you're looking at 13 to 15 million naira per ton. And that's a very wide market, though it is also posing a challenge at the level of the value chain, because it's going to increase their own cost of production. At the end of the day, there will be a high cost of these processed products back to us.
Okay.
So, which is one of the reasons why we are looking at ways to even curb these high costs, because countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, that were also major producers of cocoa, are not producing much because of disease that has attacked their crop. So you now know that the supply now will reduce. And like every other basic economic principle where the demand gets higher than the supply, obviously the price is going to go up. Okay. So that is why the cost of cocoa as at 2025 is very high. But if so many modalities are being put in place to harness this properly, you can also process it within us rather than going to the exports. There is a wider market. We are eating chocolate every day. We are using all form of beverages daily. There is no average household in a week that does not make use of confectionaries or some form of chocolate. So by also processing it within us, it will create employment for the teeming youth, and it also increase the farmers' profits. Because sometimes exporting most of these things out faces a whole lot of challenges, like the delay at the port, and because of that, out of that delay, the products might get damaged. And at the end of the day, the farmer will still be the one losing, because the quality of seed possibly taken to the exported countries might not be up to standard.
Okay.
So, but if the major things are being harnessed, we talk about the small-scale processing, empowering of the farmers, and most of the farmers are even aged. The younger ones are still not so comfortable coming into agriculture because to them they don't really see it as being appealing, you know. But if there are things put in place like grants, availability of hybrid seeds, and then other forms of machinery support and all of that, I think it will make the business a bit enticing that the younger generation can also come in.
So you made mention of some of the things you'd hope that should be done for the proper harnessing of the cocoa cash crop for the greater good of the Niger Delta region. But let's look at the government aspect. The government, you think the government is investing more in ensuring that cocoa farmers get the benefits of what they are into, or are there policies that governments have brought about that is also helping the cocoa farmers, or are there things that they've been mum about, or activities which you believe government should engage in to also assist in cocoa farming in the country?
Okay, recently, I think by January or February, there is this board, Cocoa Corporation, something, was formed by the president, which is being saddled with the responsibilities of helping the farmers harness hybrid seedlings to plants, inputs, and then also grant them either soft loan or grants to help them do the cocoa farming. And then the Cocoa Research Institute also is still there. They are also saddled with the responsibilities of constantly reviewing the species and varieties of cocoa as the day goes by, because the climate is changing. So the varieties that were grown some years back may not really do well now due to climatic factors. So the Research Institute is also doing their best to bringing in new varieties that are maturing in short time and then with greater yield, and are also not so susceptible to prevalent pests and diseases. And also, it's now left for the policy to be trickled down to the farmers, because it's one thing to give out the policies that are very good and they're beautiful, but how do we get it down to the farmers, the real-time farmers who really needs this help? Because agribusiness is highly capital intensive, and if you're not doing it right at each step of the way, you cannot definitely harness that profit you're looking for. And by so doing, a lot of farmers will pull out. A lot of people will not go into it, because people are looking at what will be my gain at the end of the struggle. Farming is not easy, you know, but it's one of the major essence of man's existence. Without farming, I don't think anybody will exist, because out of all what we do, at the end of the day, is food. And the only thing that produces food is farming.
Okay, but then how long does it take for a particular cocoa tree to begin to yield for harvesting? Or are there variations, because you mentioned some modified crops? How long would it take before that happens?
Yeah, we have hybrids now. 3 to 5 years after transplanting. Okay. With good agronomic practice, you don't just transplant cocoa into the forest or whatever your farm and then abandon them and expect them to do the magic. No, they won't. You need to take care of them. You need to control pests. You need to check your soil and know what exactly your soil is lacking that can be applied so that the cocoa can do well. So with those agronomic practices being put in place, within 3 to 5 years, your cocoa will start fruiting.
Okay.
Yes.
So then, in the next few years, let's look at what you intend cocoa plantation should be like in Nigeria. What are you looking forward to seeing? What mechanisms are you looking forward to farmers should put in place or government should put in place in the next few years, such that Nigeria can be among the top-rated cocoa exporters or even manufacturers and producers in different aspects of production?
Like the recent statistics, Nigeria is projecting 500,000 metric tons of cocoa by end of 2027. Presently, Nigeria is exporting about 280,000 metric tons. At CD Hajj, we have about 220,000 metric tons to augment to the 500. Like I say, everybody is involved. The farmers won't do it on their own, especially at a time insecurity is really a major concern. A lot of cocoa farms have been abandoned because of insecurity. There is no way we're going to harness global standard when insecurity has not been handled. And then you talk about exportation of this cocoa. You cannot expect every farmer to move their cocoa seed to Lagos depot. We have other depot around us. Talk about the Bakadif seaport. You talk about the Cross River Basin. Then you got to also talk about the One ports. These ports can be opened up. By so doing, it will shorten the time of exportation of this produce to other countries. When you get to a Lagos port, you discover that there are a whole lot of truck of cocoa being kept to be shipped out on a routine. You get me? And because they can't move out more than a certain quantity or a certain truck per day. So before it gets to a particular ton of a particular farmer, its goods may be damaging. So if we want to get into the global market properly, the ports around, especially the Niger Delta, that we have about 4 states that are producing cocoa, should be opened up. That is what the government is to do, to also help the farmers, because the farmers are also doing their best. And then also encourage the youth. We should bring in the youth into cocoa farming. The aged farmers are not doing their best. Don't forget, age is on them. So when they want the younger ones
find it very appealing and beautiful to go into cocoa farming with the incentives available on. I think there is tendency for them to, and by so doing, you see that it will open up the margin of production.
Okay.
And by so doing, our GDP will also be affected positively.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, then, with all of that in place, do you think Nigeria or the cocoa farm itself will eventually rival oil? Because we're talking about oil now, and everyone is turning their focus on oil. And of course, there are a number of concerns with the oil and gas sector. So with all of these in place, do you think the cocoa can rival the oil when it comes to economic benefits and resources?
Well, it can. Yes, it can. It can. Because agriculture is never outdated. Farming neither is also not outdated. There is no way our supply right now goes up. Okay, take for instance now, other countries are not coming up because of disease, and then we take advantage. By the time we take advantage, there's no way we'll remain the same. There's no way you can keep cocoa and oil. Cocoa has been long in existence before oil, because it was our mainstay. It was our cash crop in the country before invention of oil. So oil can equally go down, but as far as planting and harvesting is involved, I don't think it will have any time where we'll say, okay, nobody is farming again, except where we are exposed to areas where oil spillage has possibly affected. But where it has been reclaimed, the soils have been reclaimed, then we can continue. Okay. It will definitely rival with oil.
Okay, well, to wind down the conversation, and where do you hope to see the cocoa future in Nigeria, just in a few seconds as we just wrap up this conversation?
Well, I want to see cocoa in Nigeria is where we can actually process our raw materials, because sending it out for it to be processed, it comes back at a higher cost, and so many persons cannot still afford it. But where there are small holders processing within the settlement of this cocoa farming, you also see that it will help us. Individuals within our own environment can also test. Do you know that children who have never licked chocolate before? Because they can't afford it. But with semi-processing plants across, where those villagers around can actually test what a chocolate is, you know, it also builds confidence. So that's where I want us to be, where we can equally export chocolate and not just the cocoa bean.
All right.
Thank you
very much, Ndifreke Ebu, for coming on Niger Delta today and talking about cocoa and the future. We really do appreciate your insight. Thank you. And we do hope that when we get to invite you again, you'd show up. Thank you.
I will try.
All right. Thank you.